Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode 15. My guest today is Leigh McCloskey. Leigh is an actor, artist, author, visionary, and scribe. Leigh is also a great example of a Renaissance person, not only in the present moment, but over a couple of decades, several decades of cultivating a personal Renaissance that he shares with others and inspires others to actualize Renaissance for themselves. And the Renaissance is beautifully expressed not only in the language of this conversation, but in the aesthetic felt in, thanks to the Zoom technology, the background in Leigh's library. The art is everywhere, it's omnipresent. And so I invite you to immerse yourself in the aesthetic as well as the beautiful conversation and dialogue that Leigh and I had. It was a great experience on my end, and I was very much grateful for his time. And so please join me in this great conversation with Leigh McCloskey. And I'd like to welcome Leigh McCloskey to the IdeaCast interview series. I'm so grateful to have Leigh on board for this interview, for this dialogue. It's going to be a brilliant conversation. I already know this because I've talked to him to some extent prior to the meeting today, and I'm really looking forward to this. So Leigh, again, welcome to IdeaCast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Justin.
Glad to have you for sure. And so I want to just jump right into things because, again, we flow so well in the conversation. We had a pre-meet and we just had a beautiful conversation. So I know this is going to flow beautifully today. So what I thought I would start is in the interview that you had sent me, the magazine interview, the interviewer had asked about you're having a formal training in art. And you said, well, I was always drawing. And so I want to take that back to childhood or formative years or adolescence. And was there a moment and it could correlate with drawing, was there a moment in your youth or your adolescence that you sort of felt sort of like a Lacanian mirror moment where you just had this realization through art or through something that you can now look back and as an adult and say, this is the provenance, this is where the wellspring of this creativity inside you. I know your father was an artist, but was there a point in your life where you just kind of had this click and things started to either be very mysterious to you or start to flow for you?
Well, I would answer that there was a point where there was a type of click, a type of sort of coherence where a lot of pieces started to make a bit more sense. That's really when I got a bit older, because when I was younger, you're saying my dad was an artist. I grew up around an artist father who was really involved in the art association. So we had people to the house, and there was fascinating conversations. And that was a richness. And as a little kid, you don't really think about it because you're like, it's part of the milieu, so to speak. And but I began to realize that because I was pretty much of a loner, and I loved nature. I was a nature boy. I was always down at the ocean or up in the trees, and I felt very connected to nature. And I didn't really think in terms of sort of an aha. I just felt an openness to life, okay, a sense of wonder. Okay. And I think we get shut down, and then there's certain things that make us much more introspective. At least I found with myself. And I was always very not interested. I was driven really as an actor to begin with. My dad was a painter, and I was just very drawn to acting, even going back to kindergarten. So that was my journey inward. I'm very glad because that gave me ultimately the tools that, when combined with questions and the art, opened up a way of seeing that I realized that that quality of let's say, theatrical suspension of disbelief allows one to explore energies without over-identifying with them. That's really what my artwork became over the years. Yeah. But for me, it was really in my early teen years when my unconscious just dumped into me. And I began to have sleep paralysis, out-of-body experiences, dreadful nightmares.
Mm.
And it was as if my unconscious just poured into me maybe about 13 years old. And it was that feeling of I knew I wasn't crazy, but if I didn't find a way to navigate what was going on, whatever I would say would sound crazy. And I really feel like that's what triggered a sense that I had to find a language. I had to find a way to express these things. So I started, writing songs and playing the guitar and writing poetry and journaling. And my art was really influenced by my father, who said, when you can't talk about something, draw it. But don't draw to be an artist. Draw to loosen your hand. He'd always talk about this is not simply your hand; it's the human hand. It's a remarkable outcome of an extraordinary capacity. And that when we look at the human hand, and this is our relationship, we begin to trust that what's in our inner musings or what's in our inner torment wants to be expressed through us, not to create something or an object, to find a medium with which to express these things. And so a lot of my early art was just that. It was a medium by which I sought to connect with my emotional expressions. And it was when I was actually pursuing acting, and I was accepted to the Juilliard School, the drama division, and there were a handful of us. But it was also an extraordinarily tense time because it was a highly focused academy. Von Hausman, the overseer, said on our first day, "Look to your left, look to your right. One of you won't be here next year." So
Yeah.
I next year,
No pressure.
who needs to sleep? But in that, but sort of in that really just it's difficult ages too, 18, 19,
Oh, for sure.
the tumult. I started, and it was because I actually watching a calligrapher, a Japanese calligrapher, talk about breath, about prana, this. And I started to realize that it was very much like an actor. How do you capture the breath? Not how do you concerned about what it looks like, but really how does it feel? And so I started, because I couldn't connect with a character I was playing at the school, and who was very violent, wanted to kill his father. I could not find out. I had rose-colored glasses on. I said, how do I get? So I took a very large piece of paper and started using ink and actually watercolor tempera that I could use my hands with. So I started just trying to find the emotional truth of how this anger is. Where is my anger? It was interesting. I punched the thing, I used my elbow, and it moved out of a type of art as an objective sort of optical element. It's like, no, this is the way fury rises out of us. And essentially, in what happened with me, it splashed out onto this enormous. It ended up looking a bit like a Jackson Pollock. It freed something in.
Okay.
It freed me to have a completely different relationship with the artist side of things, and that freed the actor side of me. So there's a really, I just feel that what any one big thing was a lot of cumulative elements that led to a type of insistence that I find a way to language these things, or else go mad.
Yeah, for sure. So that was it. Learning to refine the channel a little bit. It sounds like to me like that moment when you made the light bulb went off after the Jackson Pollock experience, that you see that you're taming the horse to a degree, and if that's a good analogy, to lead you into a more refined expression that has led you to where you are today as an artist.
You know what it does? It gives you tools of approach. Meaning, it's
Okay.
sort of like every time you start, even if you're Chippendale, you start with the wood. It's a block of wood. You have to refine it, but you develop approaches that make you realize, wait a minute, this is a chunk of wood. It's not meant to be. I mean, that helped me even in my acting career when I was doing A Love Boat, saying this isn't Shakespeare. My inner self said, yeah, it's not supposed to be. So
Right.
how to, honor it as what it is. Don't look at it by what it's not. All you'll do is live in a sea of frustration.
Sure. Sure.
So I feel that all of my work, because I really adore the creative and imaginative self, and people, as we know, become so shut down because they become so afraid, they feel so vulnerable. So a lot of my goal was and is to create tools that aren't about belief, but a way of creating psychic inquiry or imaginative inquiry, much like an actor. When you approach a role, you don't know how to play it, the role. And if you're King John, you're not a king, you know you're not. But if you don't become King John, on the other hand, you're not going to give a very good performance. So the question is, can you become truly this other quality, this other being, know how they feel and think and where they live and what their truth is, and yet still hold your own identity and realize that to believe in the other would be madness, but to not give true meaning to the character would be to never find the role. And this is very important because we're taught to be clinical, objective, educated, sophisticated, not to embody. And that what I love about the theater element and the cumulative element of the tools that I've created of the tarot, of this room, the hieroglyph, the human soul, my work on the mandalas, the Phoenix Arise, why this is important, I'm convinced, is that we've reached a point where there's no further to go, and that the questions now are intimate. If you're creating a character, nobody can play it for you. If you're dancing, no one can dance for you. If you're making love, no one else can make love for you. Yep. And if they do, it's not very interesting. You know, in a sense, you've lost yourself.
Yeah.
Rather than reclaimed yourself. And so much of my work is, as I say, a bit like an ancient toolmaker, creating the props that allow the imagination, but like a set for actors, right?
Yeah, a facilitation.
15th century, right? You put actors in it, you put them in blouses and tights and give them rapiers and being them down. It seems very natural. You're containing in that proscenium the human imagination, and you're creating an agreement. You know, we live in a dispersed world where we've forgotten that we must create coherence. It's another group of why my work is so deeply related to the tradition of Hermetic philosophy, going back to really Pythagoras and even ancient Egypt. You know, because there's a lineage of ideation or idea that we must come to terms with, that we've reached a point where to continue down the road there is no there. So the question isn't, it's not over, but like a tree realizing if you live in Malibu, you don't try to get to Santa Monica. It's the wrong question. You start to trust mine is to go down now, to go into my roots. And that's again why when the Woolsey fire came to my door as a fire tornado, punched me back into my house. There was a moment where there was a transformation in me. It was like drawing a broadsword. The fire said, are you staying or leaving? And I said, staying. And I felt it say, that's all I needed to know. And this dragon, this thing of fury that burned down out of 240 houses around us, 180 of them. And Carla, my wife, Carla we stayed, everyone else fled. And I really feel that that was, in a sense, indicative of a lot of what is upon us. The great fire surrounding us.
Yeah.
It's asking, are you going to stay or leave? And I think it's time to go into our roots. And that's why philosophia, philosophy, wisdom, these ancient tools of archetype and the imagination, the theater of the psyche, the realization that we are the outcome, we are the technology, is essential to the next phase of the human blossom. And this is what my work reveals, even mathematically, fractally, scientifically, in the mandala. So it's not as though I'm just making this up. You know, I'm surrounded by my science. And we don't realize, because we live in a contemporary world that doesn't understand that art is the language of creation, wedded with deep inquiry, like a dance revealing itself because the music is embodied, the body knows what to do. And I feel that that's why we're talking. It's really about a reinvigorating of the laws of intimacy. This is why this is my home. It's like when I'm here and we're talking, it's like me talking about my daughters and my wife. It's not up for critique. You know, this is an offering. If it's interesting, great. But if it's not, you know, have a good lunch.
Yeah.
Let's not talk. I don't have time.
Right. No, your home is a character of its own. It's a personality of its own. It's a large personality of its own. And you talk about getting back to the roots. I was watching one of the videos you have on your YouTube channel, and you were talking about the universe or cosmos as organism, and then there's the Tower of Babel. I can't remember. I think it's that the first one, or maybe the second one. And so you were talking about the metaphor of the ascension through. Okay, there it is. The ascension through hubris, and then the fall. And so when you talk about the fire, that's sort of like you said, you had the option, and you were rooted. You were not sort of out on a limb, as it were. And I'm stretching metaphors here, but when you said that about the fire and the choice, that, you realize you're grounded. And so, a fall is not necessary in this sense, in this occasion. And so I'm just bringing that back to you from what you were saying about the fire, because that stood out to me. It was salient to me. And also, you as an actor understands significantly about the persona and the authenticity and how essential that is. And you talk about modern times and how, at least this is my judgment, we get lost in persona, we get lost in the character we present to others. And so I know intuitively that persons like yourself who have done acting and have been actors and are actors get that. At least I assume that you guys get that.
Yeah. If they're healthy, I always say. Right.
Grounded and not lost in. And again, I'm not trying to.
Yeah, because this is masks are many, few are worn well. This actually is what interested in me is in self-determination, and not that everyone is an actor or an artist in a disciplinary sense.
Right.
Actually, as I said at the beginning, it's more that we begin to utilize tools of approach from these different traditions to let's say ask a question. And I often do this when I teach painting. Is I say, well, if you have nothing to say for yourself, then read a poem, read a monologue of Richard III, and then paint as Richard III. In other words, don't get stuck in this sense of I'm just this being that I see at the mirror. That you really have a capacity to begin to be much more flexible or plastic in these inner qualities. But the question, and this is very important, and it's what I find as a director with actors, and as a father with my children, as a husband with my wife, as friends, and neighbors when the fire came. I want you to feel safe. Mm-hmm. And I feel that a lot of why this is in my home, it's a different energy. When something's to convince the neighbor or to shout at the world or as an institution or a religion, it's a different question. And it's very binary in a way. Mm-hmm. But when it's home, it's about how do we do this together? And as we can see behind me, it's also a library. Mm-hmm. So the point is that the library starts to become our time machine, meaning saying that, don't you realize that if you went there, you would lose what you have here? So the question isn't how to be transported elsewhere, but like theater, when you're transported by a great performance or a great show, right? You're actually lifted, you're inspired, you go out and you have great conversations, you think about interesting things because you've been oxygenated, you've been, in a sense, given permission to contain this other quality of seeing that now has, in a way, a setting that lets you speak about these things, because most of the time people live here and they don't have a framework so they become caught in this defining themselves by what they're against, what they don't like. In a sense, I'm not that, I'm not them.
Right.
And it creates a smaller and smaller and smaller self because it's a more and more protected mask, meaning if I took off this mask, I would be nothing. And this is, to me, a very interesting question about psychology, about, well, where do you feel safe? And a lot of these questions, because there's a lot of romance in my work, even my third book, which came when I painted Eve on the pillar as she appeared. I didn't put her here, but she appears in this story of the hieroglyph of the human soul. And she whispers a story inwardly to me. This is the romance of it, called Adam Reborn and Eve Restored, a romance in two parts. And it's the story of how Adam becomes atomized and he becomes lost in the vastness of his own creation. And that finally Eve, because he will die in the first book and be restored because he finally realizes that he asked questions of how do we reach beyond what is known. and in so doing fell into chaos, into the waters of time and eternity, and became lost in all of these worlds until finally she, you see, brings him back into the truth that love is that which transcends all time. And that's why this is a library, because essentially she's the mother of generation. And if we see this from a mythic point of view, we begin to say, yes, that's what home is meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
The quality of being that restores us to the truth that, darling, it's hard, but I love all of my children. I love you. And whether you think you're good or bad when you look in the mirror, guess what? When you turn around, you'll realize in your DNA, you're woven of all of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a big thing. That's a little thing. And maybe that's a part you were playing in a larger play you had very little control over, as if you're cast into a role.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the question isn't, were you good or bad, but did you play it well?
Yeah,
you know,
right.
That's why I say our villains often, because I've played a lot of them, we don't realize it, but they're much more easily self-defining because they know what they hate, what they don't want, what they.
It's more clear cut. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like hate is easier than love, and that's why
absolutely.
The fire, and this was revelatory. About 2 a.m. and absolutely exhausted and just surrounded by really 360 degrees of flames. Not coming over the fence, but just, I mean, really close to the fence, because it's one of those things that has been pushed back at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like being in Dante's Inferno. And I hear inwardly, do you feel everyone's prayers for you and Carla and Olendar, which is the name of our home, the name of this home. And I realize, yes, and it's palpable. It's not like wishful thinking. It's a bit like when my dad died. It's not wooma. It's not that sort of, I was feeling, it's like, no, this is like a real, where someone just grabs you by the shoulders. And what was extraordinary was I felt this energy creating a dome over our house, which is actually how the footprint of the fire burns.
Mm-hmm.
As if a dome protected us. And that the love that is usually obscured by the friction of time, right? I got to get there. I got to do this. Oh, I'm angry about that. Or do you see what's on TV? You know, it's like we're in that friction field all the time, and we're identifying with it, and we're feeding on it. You know, so like why do you watch something that makes you angry? You know, and in a way, it keeps you in a state where you can't. This is why quiet and a little meditation's good. A garden's nice because what it was love was objective, not subjective. It was as if when we stand vertically rather than horizontally, are in a state of protection. And I wasn't working against nature. I was working with nature. Barton said, and everything is stripped away from it. It's like you have no resistance. So the trees told me, these enormous trees I have, we're not fuel, we're guardians. The garden said that everything in the garden is alive. Everything alive wants to live. You're the part of the garden that's in motion. We have your back. And suddenly I was back in an alchemical imagery night with his shield, and he's leaning into the fire, and behind him is a naked woman, this great feminine beauty and power. And that he realizes in service to her, the flames are not against him. He is working with nature. You see? And it really was. So that's why a lot of my work in myth and archetype and story, all of these things, it's so interesting here because they've really been iterated on the physical plane.
Yeah, it has a currency in the real time. Yeah. And we've lost that. We've so lost that, which is why I love talking to you, because you're one of the few people I've found, and I'm not looking that hard, but I found you and I'm like, yes, I get this, right? You know?
Well, you know, it's time we live with these things. It's my question about myth. Like I love Joseph Campbell, and for those my age and a little younger will know who that is, a great teacher of mythology and power of myth, and had a great influence on our generation because it was a time of saying, don't you see that this god and these gods, it's the same play with different characters, but it's really this, and that's what the tarot tries to say. Listen, I'm really a piano, meaning I'm keys. I try to teach you that there's different manifestations, but there's a deeper instrument, you know, happening. And that's something that I feel very strongly about, that we are trying to restore a sense of, well, how do we live with our myths? You know, what's the importance? You know, why why should you look at something like the tarot when we have AI? What's the point? Aren't we moving forward?
Right.
And this is actually saying many questions that we seek to know must be asked with the tools of what we call timelessness, because they exist in the realm of the timeless, meaning you can't know time if it takes time to do so. In other words, it's something that creates in our realm the need to create a tool, an analogy, a correspondence, so that the imagination then can create a vehicle. That's why this instrument, it becomes a vehicle of consciousness, because anyone that comes here, because it's fixed, it's not in movement, it's in the primary technology of paint and imagination. Now, this takes us back to the painted cave. And when we think of the deeper symbology here, and what's interesting, it's not applied. I'm not making up any of this. I'm just really like a tour guide going, and do you realize this is on ancient sacred Shumash land? And they were the great custodians of all of this area for over 10,000 years. And they didn't leave because they wanted to. So I'm on this land. What is my responsibility? And like the fire, it says, it's not to keep going, it's to bear witness. So I love that in this room, because the other thing here is that in 1980, when we moved here, 81, I began discussion groups. And I've had discussion groups every week for 40 years. So there've been over 4,000 discussion groups in this room of people like ourselves and the people watching, because you showed up. You said, I'm curious about this. Well, think of an ancient library that says, if you're not curious, I'm not bringing the books to you. If you're grown up now. So if you need someone to do it for you, you know what? They're going to control you. It's just as simple as that.
Right.
But I'm looking for the ones that show up. So my house became, Olendar became, and I started this when I was doing the television show Dallas. So there was this huge juxtaposition of
for sure.
absolute fandom over this character, who was young, good looking and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Theosophy group that I had begun here, which lasted 25 years. And to balance that, I had a Thursday night Western inner traditions, looking at everyone from Jung to William Blake to Huxley and perennial philosophy, all of these books that I felt needed to be read, and that the symbols, we wanted to really stoke the fires of why are these important texts, almost like Fahrenheit, was it 451, where they realize they're the custodians of the books because they care about them.
Right.
And it's the metaphor of our time, in a sense, this inability to concentrate, an inability to carry a thought, to actually have a conversation, and to believe that an opinion is thinking. And as opposed to a diminishment, most opinions have us, we don't have them. And that's an important thing to remember, especially if you find yourself needing to respond to something when you think about it. Why do you even have in the race, a dog in the race?
Right, right.
And this is about self, in a way, refinement, because it's a bit like what happened here. Over these thousands of groups, and then we have had thousands of public-private gatherings here, from presentations, documentaries, documentarians, to me giving conversations and talks and tours here. So it's a very private but very public home. But this is why the art is important, because we always think like, all right, this was an art show. Why was this art created? What was the context for this art, and for whom? And this is a decidedly different relationship than we're used to. It's never been sold. It was only exhibited many years ago with the paintings, The Universe as Organism, when I did a show with my father. So it was something that has always been about intimacy, like an orchid, like grow it first, because you're not going to convince people that don't care about these things that they should, but don't let those that don't care convince you that you shouldn't care.
Yeah.
It's important because we become exhausted. And that's why this room and this art, I can fall on my chair and say, at least here it matters. I'm not telling my neighbor how to be or what to think. And when people come here, I don't care what your politics are. You know what I want is a conversation that helps us look at all things like politics with a larger vision that says, if we can get out of the conflict and begin to make it theater rather than debate, we'll start to realize that we're at a critical and remarkable time
Hmm.
regathering, and that here it says the last key isn't. The last key is not what are you against, but what you love. The fire also told me, and it was very furious. I would almost say it was something wicked this week, something very ancient and very angry. It said that the apocalypse is upon us, but it doesn't happen all at once. And it's very important because the apocalypse is about a time of truth telling. And it said that those that spend their time angry at their neighbor, not realizing that their house is on fire, will lose everything. And those that think they can build walls to defend themselves against that which is their responsibility as well, will lose everything.
Hmm.
There's a drought in the human heart, and I am that fire which will seek it out and burn it from within. And this was before COVID. And I thought, wow, affects the lungs, affects breathing.
Hmm.
This was about the fire. And this is why archetype is very important. This is why my work on the last judgment or the judgment archetype is so important. Because it helps us understand this isn't random. This is why Joseph Campbell was so important. If you can see the mythic overlay, if you understand the archetype that is present, then you're not Henny Penny, you're Chicken Little. You're beginning to understand, no, there's a larger theater of experience that is actually like an alchemical alembic, heating up, forcing transformation.
Hmm.
We have been like this, metaphorically, for so long, thinking power is the bud, the closed fist, the be against. But what's happening is that that is being broken up, and like a bud beginning to open, and we feel that we are losing our grip. We try and pull even tighter, but in pulling back tighter, because the season has come, it no longer can enclose and bring it back to what it was. But as it begins to open, and this is important for the coming time, because the prophecy here essentially through art, not religion, but art, meaning creation, through beauty, through agelessness, is saying that why the resistance is that our desire is to run. We see something and we think, oh, that's it. Like why the last part of the body we would put on would be our head was because if we put on our head first, we'd never build the body. You see what I'm saying? And that's why we're at a point where as this begins to blossom, it's not going to happen out there.
Hmm.
And this is why I see Renaissance, why I see a type of imaginative and creative evolution. I don't see it religious. I don't think it's spiritual. I think those are attributes that feel good personally, but have in a sense served their purpose. Like a lot of my work, in a way, I realize one could argue reincarnation or whatever comes from obviously a great number of lives in different traditions that were very disciplined, as if this work is impressed on my DNA. But my job was, like with the tarot, I realized build the piano, build the instrument, and then give people the keys, because you're an actor, and actors want fellow actors to light up and say, or like jazz musicians, right?
Right. Play off each other.
Great trumpet. What the hell? We don't compare each other. We inspire each other.
Yeah.
And this sort of the accountants of the imagination, the bottom liners and that's in us. It's not them. We really have to begin to put our arms around and say, guys, it's not that I don't want you there. I just don't want you on top of me, on my side. And I don't mind being pragmatic, but I don't want to be malignant pragmatism.
Right.
I don't want to drain my life force, making me to be less and less and less, defining me more and more and more by what I hate. You know, we're artists of consciousness. And that's why it's so tough. This is a type of final exam going on. I still knew I could put it.
Well, it's a reckoning. I think there's a dam and behind the dam is 300 years, and I'm not going to blame the Age of Enlightenment entirely, but we have this Humean empiricism and this metaphysical materialist mentality that, as you pointed out, it dismisses mythology and the spirituality outside of religion, and all these things that are considered to be bullshit or whatever. And it's like, that is such an integral part. When you don't take it literally. Mythos is flexible. It's to be interpreted through allegory and symbolic meaning. And we modern people, just in at least Western modern people, we struggle with that. And we have clowns that are strict, staunch neo-atheist types that just rail against this kind of woo-woo nonsense, but they're missing everything in that, and it's like you don't go fully down that tunnel of belief in the sense that you believe mythos is real. Mythos is a tool. It's a guide. It's an instruction, right? And so I think that is the apocalypse. And I'm just offering another element. I'm joining you in saying that this buildup is the denial. It's the escapism through, like you said, through artificial intelligence and post-humanism and all this nonsense about moving to Mars and things like that to escape the nihilism that we created for ourselves and the products of nihilism, which is the destruction of our planet and our psyche and everything. But anyway,
well,
I totally agree.
No, it's transhumanism. It's, as I say, we won't become transhuman until we become human. The odd conceit that somehow, because we have apparatus and gadgets, somehow has increased the quality of thinking or of life, isn't observable anymore. I mean, this is why, when you think about this culture, why has art been done away with or made completely irrelevant? Wait, they used to round up the artists first. Because I realized that, you could get people to think differently. Then capitulate solely to authority, because obviously to be an artist, you think for yourself. What is this? And it's very important, because then we begin to see the psychology. Like, let's say the well-heeled, well-credentialed intellectual atheist whose voice seems to boom so loudly is really just a character in the play whose voice is meant to resound loudly because it's the echo of emptiness. And it's that sense of bellowing something must, in a sense, protect the cadaver that it's in a sense trying to say is alive. And this is why we start with math in this culture, not the life principle. This is why the masculine, not the feminine, is what we turn to. Why we turn to time and distance and space when we try to think of who we are. Well, I must get somewhere. Well, a tree doesn't ask that, as I say. This is why the ancient Druids called themselves trees. And why our ancient sites were built of stone and not movable. We were what was movable and are movable. We are the technology. And what's so interesting is that I live in primary technology, paint and storytelling. So when I see technology and the voice of technology, I say, yes, there's AI. Good. There's probably 3.
It has a purpose.
But I believe in AI, which is ancestral intelligence. Meaning that if you do not bring wisdom to the table, if you do not bring primary creative relationship to the story, then you begin in the abstract universes of math and you will never find home. You will be as if in a broken mirror where every piece refracts a brilliant light, but you'll never find the light. You'll never find it. And this is the refraction of all the books in the library, the search across the ages. Who am I? Why am I here? What does it mean to be human? Why do you think the DNA is here? Why do you think it's in my artwork? Why is it a fractal geometrical sacred weave through my Phoenix of Mars painting? It's because it's saying, do you realize that you are whole and holy? You're holographic. And in a hologram, there's no there. Your physics is wrong. If it's telling you it takes 100 million light years to get to the nearest star, it's because you're looking at that star in reflection. And this is very important because we don't know how to penetrate the veil, because our physics doesn't include the other hemisphere. And that's what happens here. It's not rejecting anything. As I say, you want to put a rover on Mars, you talk to those scientists and those dreamers and those visionaries, because man, they should be honored. But if we're going to have, as we did in the Renaissance, a polymath version of genius, of what it means to be human, we had better find the hub. And the hub is that which says, what are the values that were valuable to all of your ancestors? What in this would your ancestors recognize? Because they wouldn't understand the technology, the televisions, they wouldn't get the telephone. They'd think that was demonic, probably. So the question is, what would they? And what's beautiful in this room, it answers the question. Well, they'd know the books, they'd know the paintings, they'd know the story because it's pictures, so they'd interpret it differently, right? Because a picture's worth 1,000 words. So obviously this is trying to tell us a great womb of the human story has come home, but it will not be given to those who seek to be entertained into submission. are those who seek to hate their neighbor or want to tell their neighbor how to raise their children. That will take a lifetime away from an individual shouting at someone else. I mean, this is why a lot of, I call this a mental martial art. I feel like an old martial artist. I said, gang, we're so good at kicking ass. Our karate, man, I can take anything. But guess what? It doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work force against force. So what do? That's where you start to do like with the fire. You start work with it rather than against it. You start to reclaim, well, where do I live? If I turn away from the mirror of self-reflection, where am I? And this work says you're home, but you're in a library. So your resource as human is you can put the story together any way you can. And why don't you put it together in a way you can live with?
Yeah.
That's what I do. I live with it. That's why I'm not making up any of this and what I'm passionate about. I feel like a gardener that is offering. That's why the hieroglyph of the human soul, this room, which began on 9/11, 2001, when the towers in New York came down, I didn't set out to paint the room. That would be insane. Even I know that. But in an odd way, it's that question of how do you move across that abyss separating sanity from madness? And that's the creative bridge, because it gives us a tool, a mask, a way of focusing these energies without being swept away by them, allowing us to create that which then gives the imagination a lens by which to experience these things again, but not be dissolved by them. That's why in this room, we're not looking at a room in time. We're looking at a room that is the outcome of time. And that the painting we saw that I pointed the camera at took over 3 years to paint. So what is in that painting? Breath, pigment, atom, atomic structure. So actually we're living inside of a type of lung. This is what is not understood because again, our physics are objective rather than sentient, because we start with math and abstraction rather than with life and creation. That's why this language of creation here is essential and why the conversation is very private. I mean, I'd love to say that there were more people interested in these things, but they simply aren't. And so to come to terms with it, you'd have to say why. And it was interesting that on 9/11, I was told that I was to build an ark. But this was a philosophical seed ark, and that all arks are not built to navigate physical waters, but this is to navigate the mental waters, because the last flood was water. This flood is information. So the question is, how do I navigate? And what is the premise upon which I navigate? So I even have a studio below and a studio above. As above, so below. My studio below holds my 17 years of work on the major arcana of the tarot. I created completely original drawings.
The revision.
And I wrote the text, and it was reviewed as possibly the most significant contribution in over 100 years to the tradition. And it is. I say that with, like Chippendale. It's a damn fine piece that will work remarkably in creating ingress into why, when I ask myself, who am I, do there seem to be so many? What is this? How do I navigate it? How do I move beyond being stuck at self-reflection and just self-loathing? How do I turn away from this madness and realize that there is a way? And so it's very much a thing now of those that care. The alchemists called themselves celestial gardeners. And when I look at history, whether it's Emerson and the Transcendentalists, whether it's William Blake and the Shoreham Ancients, the Sydney Circle, in every time and every age, the darkness defines the light, essentially. And so there's reaction to that. But then there's always those of us that say, well, yes, that's a given. That's a storm on the horizon, and is. But my question isn't about the storm. It's about how do I navigate it? And how do I bring those on board that actually want to use these energies, not to reject them, but to draw forth from them. That's why even the art here, I tell people, it's literally drawn forth. It's the watcher language that appears on 9/11/2001. And it turns out that the acronym here for the hieroglyph of the human soul is THOTHS, which is thought. Culture doesn't mean much, but in the old days, really, it was Thoth Hermes, this relationship the as above, so below.
Mm-hmm.
And that the story mythic we hear is that the journey of as above, so below that began with the ancient Egyptian and the gods and alignment and the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
The obelisk fell over and Moses took us into the desert and the ego began because God was no longer present, but elsewhere. And from this law and this journey, this angst, the Christ impulse comes and says, you are uniquely worthy of salvation. But we're in Roman times. And the overlay of all of these different ingredients leads to the Roman Christian Judaic state. And we end up with a great deal of form and structure and a great deal of loss of a type of unique connection or unique worthiness without an intermediary. And so that's why I think we're facing not a personal dilemma, but a type of deep philosophical dilemma, soul dilemma. And in a world that says there is no soul, which is a type of profound poverty. It's a bit this is why I had to start studying when I inquired into the New Age and found most of it so very vapid.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, I thought it's it's looking for a different set of.
It's escapism.
Yeah, it wasn't. I needed to know how these things are put together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like you don't just give me a car. Let me know how it's put together. That's why I built the tarot. So I even took bookbinding. You know, I wanted to know. I even took sound engineering.
Mm-hmm.
How does this happen?
Yeah, right.
Because I don't want other people to tell me.
Yeah.
I want to know. And that's what's so intriguing is that for me, you know, the symbolism of this inquiry, you know, having turned 66 on the summer solstice, I realized that many times around the sun has made me very confident that life is the art form.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a bit like styles in art. It's not meant to be the same style. It's meant to be the truth that you are not born incomplete. You're given the instrument. The instrument then says, do you ask the questions that allow yourself to play or simply to be played? And this is one of the keys, I think, for the upcoming times, is that there are many distractions and there are many gadgets that will give the illusion of getting somewhere, but it's a bit like a dog discovering its tail and then going ever more quickly after its own tail.
Right.
And this is a great way to control people. But I would not say it's others controlling them. It's actually the inner self allowing itself to be controlled. And that's why you can't awaken sleepwalkers, but you have to begin to say, I see, okay. Because it's about, again, this martial art of how do I utilize my energy most effectively? You know, and that's what I realized as an actor. I turned my lens from, you know, going to cafes or discos and dissipating, having conversations, having a family, cultivating a garden and friends that were philosophical friends. Meaning, and Justin, it's like you and I talking, people that we pick up a conversation, have an ease of conversation with each other. That's what I love about my discussion groups.
Mm-hmm.
Love me feeling very much like an old Arthur, delighted that Camelot this time, we don't have to defend with swords, but we have to realize that the world is full of swords because words are swords. The maxim, he who lives by the sword shall most assuredly perish by the sword, is true.
Mm-hmm.
Words are creating a matrix, a construct. This is what's not known about really the magical side of words and the ancient knowing about them, is you're casting a spell. So be careful what you cast.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, it's just a very interesting ancient perception that's come up by turning the lens toward, you know, that the best way to, let's say, transform anything is not to try to transform it, but to be the transformation you want to bring.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about my art, because people look at it and go, oh my God, you know, it's so good. And no one's more surprised than me. It's a bit like me taking on King Lear, let's say, which I haven't, but I would love to.
Mm-hmm.
And being brilliant and going, I don't really know. It's there. You know, and that's what this feels like. That's why it does feel like an entity, like a character to play that is saying, listen, I needed to come where people gather and care about these things, where they're not critiquing and hating God and hating everyone and thinking and full of darkness and conspiracy. Or if they are, they're trying to, get enlightenment to lighten up. Because this is how we actually get rid of our demons. We give them place. We don't kill them.
Yeah.
We give them context. We make them a little smaller than they need to, yeah.
That's one thing we're missing in the United States, and there's a European philosopher that I follow, and he says we live in innocence in the U.S., and it's not just the U.S., but Western modern, and we abate the shadow, we bury the shadow, and it will come back, but it comes back violently. And so if we can acknowledge the shadow, and as you just said, do not empower and be driven by the shadow, that the awareness of the shadow and perhaps a management that's best facilitated by yourself is the means. And so, yes, I completely agree. And I think there are cultures where the shadow is recognized, or they have other words for it, managed and exercised and put in its proper place or context. But I think we've lost that, along with a lot of other things. Again, some symbolism and metaphor and allegory and the mythos and things like that. I think the shadow aspect needs to be dealt with better, more efficiently here. Which is
you could almost argue that artificial intelligence, like artificial light, creates that which disallows the seeing of the dark. But the dark, and so we're distracted by the light. We follow it, like going around I'll follow that, and shadow is there always, and therefore it becomes a smaller and smaller island within which a person feels secure or safe. They start to feel, because there's the dread of that which is noticeably not being dealt with. And that's why I feel like, you look at COVID, it was like the perfect boogeyman. You know what I mean? And that's, even the effect on people's psyches, on their mental health, has been this fascinating shadow. And it's interesting because the shadow here, the watchers, are actually what you would say the sentient weave, like the strings, the quality that create the very theater within which we are contained and are woven of ourselves. But essentially, again, like that which does not engage but creates a quality that reflects back to us whatever we put into it. This is why when you go back to the book of Enoch, it talks about the watchers, and that they're both benevolent and malevolent. And it turns out that essentially whatever is within an individual will generate an equal quality within this shadow element that then constructs the world according to that perception, which is an interesting thing to think about. And that the shadow not dealt with, that's what Jung said. He said that it was the West's inability to deal with the shadow of Christ, the way the church had turned him into a perfect being of light and rejecting the shadow, that it would come back, and it has, of course, to truly haunt us, because of you cannot live solely in day. This is why Dionysus and Apollo, why night and day, were always so important. If you think of the imbalance of the masculine and the feminine, right? Yin yang. You have, when you only have one, you have this continual imbalance. And when that happens, it's like your back starts hurting and you start adjusting your hips. And by the time you're done, you're gonna be like this.
Get the pry bar.
I'll get the bell.
Comfort rest, please. And you talk about the Christ character and the temptation by the devil in the desert. Well, no, the devil was an inquisitor. He was a prosecuting attorney, right? And that role got completely lost through the rise of scholasticism and dogmatic Christianity. But that's such a important part, right? The inquisitor and the
adversary,
like Radaman.
He's the adversary. Only later does he become Satan or the devil. The
scapegoat.
And that's St. Augustine, really, and that's by really turning Christianity into a political doctrine. To make sure that you honor the state. The state is the church. The church is a manifestation of the hierarchies of heaven made manifest in its clergy, So therefore, to question that is to be as the devil, who was the first liar, according to St. Augustine, and that he is therefore heretical, and because he is capable of not believing in an orthodox way, meaning the one way. So heretic, of course, means the ability to choose.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, because if we stop figuring out, well, I and my brothers, I don't like that. It's like, shut up, that doesn't matter. It's like a book. It's like the Peloponnesian War. I mean, yeah. Who are you for? It's sort of that this emotional I side with it, that in a way oftentimes fogs the lens to say, no, wait a minute. Look at this more as ingredients, in a way, almost like different parts of a great experiment that exaggerate certain things, take certain things. Well, what would happen if? A bit like a painter, where you say, well, this doesn't work, I'll take this out. Let me see. Well, what would happen? Because you're trying to ultimately not deal with a particular part, but all of the parts rising into a coherent realization. And that's what I feel, again, going to our time, is that all of these parts have emerged into a coherent realization, but not in the way we'd expected, nor in the places where we think it would be important. Meaning that we want a type of religiously recognizable Christ coming in to save us, or we want from science a type of recognizable scientific breakthrough that saves us.
Yeah,
and
salvation.
In the middle falls the human experience.
Yeah.
Which in that yearning, it's almost like you thought of the yearning like this, right? It lifts us finally to realize that we only have where we are standing. We only have our self-reflection, our unique identity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to be more or different, but to begin to recognize again that there is a book of life. This is what I discovered directly with my father's death.
Mm-hmm.
And that when his book fell off the shelf, essentially, into the waters of time, all the words, all the qualities floated into the water, and the waters came together into a unique pattern. But as he died, as I saw his book being squeezed, and the waters returning to the waters, and the waters were no longer with a pattern, they were still like a lake.
Mm-hmm.
And as the book was placed back on the shelf, I heard a loving voice say, but now it's been lived. And I thought, what if we're missing the point that to be human is heroic? We're not schmucks. We are the outcome of a willingness. And this is what my art, my creation, the hieroglyph is saying, is that, you're not the outcome of a mistake. You're the outcome of a willing adventure into the nature of consciousness and unique identity that didn't begin because you were just a microbe, but actually began because from your perspective, you were ancient gods. And this is the elongated head that shows up in my work. It's actually a suggestion. And these are my books of Tor, which I spent 25 years on and wondered where they were from. And this is really the relationship to an ancient universe that is almost like is there a ship in the night directly beneath us. Mm-hmm. We would think of it in terms of time, about 18.5 million years in depth, in time. And why this is important is it really does begin to say that we gave up direct knowing. This was the elongated head. This mirrors, we can see this in Egyptian symbology with the pharaoh, where there's the upper and lower Nile. Well, the Nile to the ancient Egyptians was the Milky Way. Mm-hmm. The upper Nile symbolically is not just the upper Nile, it's the Milky Way. And that elongated head meant that star knowledge, which we see manifested in the celestiomancy of the pyramid of the plateau, right? Because that's in relation to Orion. These are not arbitrary. It's extraordinary, as we know. That's because this knowledge was present. But the question, you could almost say with Moses, where the hierophantic head comes off, meaning we're going to go away from this direct knowing, no longer connected to the stars. But this will force us, again, on the horizontal. We'll start journeying away from, because we'll never feel at home. When you look at all the books in the library, you go, wow, that's exactly what happened. This human quest began, I never feel at home. Where am I? Where do I belong in this vast universe? What is the meaning? Because once meaning was given, a bit like the mother's breast. Once milk was there. But what happens when the door shuts? You're raised and you're gone. You're out. It's like you are forced into a whole different realm of development. And if we think of this organically, we start to realize that the Ursprung of Goethe, this idea that we are the human plant, and that the fractal, the iteration that is seen in the seed that iterates through all of the growth and geometries of the plant itself, to reveal not actually something in time and evolution without end, but actually a progressive organic state that achieves a type of summation, meaning a blossoming, wherein all parts contain the necessary energy to allow for the next manifestation of this quality. And I feel that that's very much where we're at now, is that we're beginning to understand that we are an organism, and that the story of Tor, the story of this ancient being, is that, and it really feels like scientists, but of a much different beingness, meaning that this daringness to say, what if we forgot everything? And you know, when you start a project, you think, yeah, well, let's try that. How hard could that?
Yeah, right.
You know, and that's what's happened, is we're all worn out. I think that's why people, if you say, are you weary? They go, yeah. How's your soul doing?
Right.
You know, it's because that's not personal. There's a soul weariness that this has taken literally forever, this human experiment. That's why people that want to be transhuman, I say, don't become a cyborg. That's a distrust of the genius of who you are. This being, this capacity, is the vehicle of transportation. We can travel multidimensionally, but we'll never create an object machine to do it with, because essentially that in its elements misunderstands the basic physics of what it's trying to do. What are the energies that actually do these things? If they're not like with like, you will create the simulacrum, the ersatz of this is it, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do. I feel like a lot of this is this dynamic pullback to, yes, but put yourself in the picture. What if you as a human being are not new? What if you're not a mistake? What if your elders were extremely advanced beings that asked you on an ancient level, are you willing to enter a question that we have no idea about? Are you willing to become the living element of it and to die over and over and over again, but realize that every time you do, you'll add that book to the library. One more question will have been lived. One more possibility would have been put forth. Like Feynman talking about an electron, saying that the electron follows every probability, you know, in its spin, and that's what creates illusion that we perceive as
Solidity. Yeah.
That's brilliant. What if that's the human atom? Because this room is actually saying we don't build spaceships. That's to go somewhere. That's to misunderstand. That's bad theater. We build mind ships because that brings it here. That's why our ancient sites, why the Maya, it was stone. It was to bring it here, to anchor it, because we wanted to interact with it, not worship it and convince ourselves that we were not it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why we really have a very damaged psyche. I mean, I just have to, you know, why many of the things we want to solve, unless we have a creative, imaginative realignment with, yeah, okay, I like that story better. I like that maybe rather than just being some loathsome loser, you know, and that's why the floor of this, which it all began on, right, is linoleum. And I thought, oh, that's the mythic key. We think we are meant to be golden and we're just linoleum.
Mm-hmm.
And so our mythic structure says, what do you do with the linoleum? What do you do with the ordinary? And this actually says, well, guess what? When it's ordinary, you're free from all of the beliefs and all of the books. You're home. So make of it what you will. And like my experience, don't expect all of the neighbors to show up. But those who show up will allow you to have a much more interesting conversation because they'll be fellow gardeners.
Yeah.
No? And I'm tired of it because I spent a life as an actor, you know, in a sense, this is for you, this is for you, let me think. You know, it's like this was the other side of things. This is that which said, I must honor the things I love. And I tell people, build an altar in your home that is private, that isn't about some God elsewhere, but just reminders from life of, I value this. The smell of this pine branch, oh, that reminds me when I was with her by the stream and I remember. It's sense memory, is what we learn as actors, sense memory. Realize that most of what we seek is in the sensual body. And we are so displaced at this point, which is why I know that a lot of my work is to plant seeds now. Because there's the doctrine of exhaustion is occurring. That like an alcoholic, you don't actually quit, you just become exhausted. You just can't do it anymore.
Yeah. And then you look for salvation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what you look for, and that's why I love what I love about this is I was always looking for essentially religion without religion.
Yeah.
You know, can you enjoy the beauty and inspiration without somebody in a cloak saying, "This is what I expect of you"? You know,
Mhm.
that somebody in a cloak be inside of me saying, "Leigh, why don't you not worry about those things and get busy painting?" That'll be the revelation for you, not what
Mm.
I didn't want you to believe ever any more than that. I wanted to believe in a character I played. I've played characters that are the quite literally the opposite of myself.
Mm.
The General Hospital played Damian Smith, who I actually modeled after Donald Trump in those days.
Mm.
I was working on the trumps, which are the tarot arcana, are called trumps. So there's all this sort of cosmic humor going on.
Oh yeah.
It's not enlightenment; it's enlighten up.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
like,
oh, trust me. Yeah. Humor is
darling.
pataphysics. That's where it's at. The absurdity of life.
Yes, exactly.
Celebrate it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No one gets out of it alive, so you might as well stop
Have a
trying
good
to.
time,
I'm
right?
gonna die. I'm gonna die. Yeah, of course you are. So that's the obvious. Enjoy it in the meantime. It's my
Yes.
philosophy. In the meantime, before your work is recognized, before people think you're a genius, before they applaud you, do the work. I mean, my whole story is in the meantime. And I found this
Mhm.
with my philosophical discussion groups. I always thought, oh, this will be, more people will show. And I always found it was about the same number. And I find that the same thing in the interest in all of these things. It's about the same. So there is something telling about that, which starts to almost like with St. Paul, where he says that because it was Christ as Adam Cadmium, meaning the one body, or the being, the human genome as one. And
Mhm.
it said some are the eyes, some are the nose, some of the mouth. But I think that that's what we have to come to terms with. That if you are of the eyes, or if you are vision, or a part of feeling, or those qualities, that the rest of the body has other things to do. And not to try and impose, but actually to find other qualities of like nature. Because the whole point of sympathetic magic, like the magic of theater, is group agreement that allows the in a way that the energies of the combined to really lift all of us. And that's why I really feel like this, again, going back to that metaphor of home, that home is a place where we have dinner together, where we talk, where we talk about our kids. In other words, we talk about the things that aren't high and mighty and Moses parting the Red Seas. We
Mhm.
start to say, that reminds me of, and let me get a book from the library, tell you a story, share something with you. And that's why even when I created Ollendorf Foundation for Emerging Renaissance as a type of philosophical keystone, meaning it wasn't a foundation, but a foundation,
Mhm.
a philosophical foundation. A friend said, do you realize that the acronym for that is offer, OFFER? And I thought, oh, so you've got Thoth's offer.
Mhm.
Thoth, or Thoth, as the teacher of wisdom, the library, meaning that we are composed of the outcome of the conditions we have been seeking. But then now it's up to us. It's a question not of changing the linoleum, the ordinary, into the gold, or winning the lottery, or being the smartest guy on the block, but actually saying, how do I treat people I love? How do I treat myself? Am I when I'm looking at the world saying, do you see those stupid people? Where is that in me? And I don't mean this in a type of lightheaded way. I mean, this is what the tarot helps us realize, is that, and this is why my writing on it is so effective, because it helps us understand that a lot of the forces that work upon us and through us are a bit like being plunged into dark water. We have very little control over. The only thing we can do is begin to recognize, oh, this is what's happening. And it allows us to go with it rather than to think there's something wrong with us.
Yeah, and fight it.
Yeah.
And that's the flow. That's the Wu Wei. Well, the
Yeah.
Tao anyway. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
just as a reference for people.
No, because the Wu Wei, the pathless path, all of that. If you think of the vision of being on a vast ocean. Now, if you looked at the ocean and there were things in it and you took it personally, it's not on board with you. But you think, oh, that log, and you start worrying about it, or you see a sea squall or dark, or it's taken so personally. And a lot of this, I believe, the mental martial art is to learn to ask the question, what is on board with me and what do I need to navigate? It's not that that isn't real, but it's not actual. It's not, it's like if the TV is on and you find yourself like I do, getting into Yosemite Samitis,
Yeah, yeah.
turn it off.
Yeah.
It's playing you. Start to realize when you drive past, let's say, a certain, and it gets awakens, let's say, a negative reaction out of you. Question: where is this coming from, and do I need it? Because this is something that I feel a lot of things attach themselves to our mind, essentially. Not because it's evil as much as it's a type of mentoring through torment.
Mm.
You know, you will
Suffering is a
finally
great
release
master.
this. Do you see? Yeah, I can't do this to myself anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, because of sleep paralysis and nightmares for every night from about the age of 14 to 23, it was just dreadful. But it made me very fearless, ultimately, because
Mm-hmm.
I had to not simply resist the darkness, but to enter into it, to
Mm-hmm.
become it, to transmute it by embracing it. And I think that's also why I do feel like theater games, automatic, really paint as a way of connecting. The use of symbology and pictures is a way of creating symbolical structure for the inner self to begin to express itself with us. I always feel, and this is what I felt before the tarot, because there are 22 keys, and each of them are like a slice of pie, meaning they are your spokes of a wheel. And that each spoke, each quality, like a planet in astrology or a sign in the seasons, is that it's saying that we are all organic beings, meaning we're composed of this matrix of these qualities, and that usually they're all compressed, so we don't see a pattern, and we don't see our unique pattern, because it's almost like Christmas tree lights. It's all wrapped together, and
Right.
you plug it in, it all goes off at once. The question is, well, how do I actually pull it apart so I can see how it's put together?
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting, because the 17 years on my tarot is I wanted a cosmological spine. This is what was missing in the tarot, because I wasn't interested in divination. It's like an actor. Don't tell me what my performance is going to be. Let me
Yeah.
fall on my face or let me succeed, but don't get in my way. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want a divinatory thing. I wanted a way to create, how do I talk with these qualities within me? And how do I understand that, like the library, all characters are present, both inwardly and outwardly, and use the outward mirror as a way of asking questions inwardly. And that's why, as we pull out the archetypes, we begin to see the magus, often called the magician, but the magus in my deck, my work, is he is the initiator. He is the seed, meaning that his is the philosophical ingress into the arcanum, meaning into this question of what and who am I? Man, know thyself, and thou shalt know the mysteries of the universe, from the Delphic. And this is important because what will unfold are, from that, the high priestess, the empress, the emperor, the hierophant, the lovers, the chariot, strength, the hermit, the wheel of fortune, justice, the hanged man, death, temperance, the devil, the tower, the star, the moon, the sun, judgment, the world, and the fool. That's that. Do you see how what I did? If it was a play, I just
Journey.
introduced 22 characters in the play. Now, why this is helpful is that when we do this, we begin to see a bit like the polymath in the Renaissance, the wheel, you see. And the genius there was, it said, if you're going to ask certain questions, you need to know which spoke to use.
Mm.
And each of these, now they'd say Venus or Mars, which is the Empress and the Tower in the tarot, and the Emperor as well, Aries, ruled by Mars. They would say, do you see in our gardens in the Renaissance, do you see, if we're going to ask a question of love, we go to the Venus in the grotto. And we put ourselves in that theatrical condition of mind, because that feeling nature is where these answers will be absorbed. But if we want to understand ratio and logic, we'll go to the topiary, the geometrical gardens, and listen to Bach.
Mm.
Because it was to satisfy the different palettes. And we've become so highly specialized. But I do think, and I see more and more of it, and I think this is part of it, because my work bridges, because I ask the questions physicists ask, and philosophers ask. I wasn't asking modern art questions. I read everything, but it wasn't my cup of tea. I wasn't interested in painting is dead, art is useless, and it's irrelevant. I thought, well, not have that attitude, but maybe I can't share that attitude. So maybe I'll have to bring it home with me. And that's why this is a cry in the wilderness. At least here, I don't put up with art is dead, painting is over. It's like telling an actor, oh, theater is over. It's like, shut up and get out of theater.
Yeah.
That's your attitude? I hate baseball. Don't play it then.
Yeah.
Don't make your critique of baseball any more than your damn conceit.
Yeah.
Doesn't make a baseball player any happier because you don't like a pitcher. I mean, it's like, get over yourself.
Yeah.
I just, I feel at this point, it's like, show up with your art, not your critique. What have you done with your life? How does your life reflect your beliefs? And if they are so darn fervent in you, then what do you feel at the end of the day? You find yourself leaning back and going, yes, life. You find yourself going, God, I just can't wait to get home. I hate that person.
Yeah. Judgment.
Yeah. And believe me, those energies will devour. That's why I get from everything that's going on. Just don't make it yours.
Yeah. Be the observer.
Like watching those ships battling and burning.
Mm-hmm.
And ours is about safe harbor.
Mm-hmm.
About what do you do? Because the whole point is, the heroics of taking, of not caring, of dominating, have reached their end. Doesn't work in relationship. The next question is, how do you treat the people you love? What do you do with all the armor you've developed in the outer world? How do you take it off? How do you actually become tender and vulnerable? Even to yourself, how do you let go?
Mm-hmm.
We are so wound up, so hyper tight, because we're not willing to breathe. And my whole point is, art doesn't demand anything. Nothing I do says you must believe anything or follow anything. This is much more interesting than you think. You have the tools, but don't think it's going to be an iPhone that will liberate you.
Yeah.
If you want to find where the cafe is, great. If you want to text your kids, great. But if you think you're going to find an answer, you're going to find entertainment that distracts you into submission. And you will be dissipated and you will not feel energized. You'll feel a type of dysphoria in the body, not wanting to be touched. These are signs. This is mental illness. And this is why, really, you have to begin to, like any addiction, really take stock of where am I putting my energies? Because this isn't a game. I mean, that's the thing I felt with the fire. These energies they're not going to baby us. There's no getting back. I mean, everyone is, as I say, either choosing life or what grave to be buried in at this point. And you have to ask, are your questions about death? That's the path you're following. And it's very important because this is what we don't understand. It's called egregores, thought forms. What we think is not simply our thoughts. We are thought very often by larger qualities of thinking. And we can be swept up into something that after the fact, like being swept up into a mob, we think, what was I thinking? Well, you weren't thinking. Mm-hmm. You were being thought, a bit like a zombie computer.
Yeah.
You were being influenced in a way that kept you from telling your truth, because your truth is loving. Your truth is full of wonder. It's not full of doubt and suspicion about other people. It's not hateful. That's not the real you.
Yeah.
We have to remember this. And that's what she tells me, right?
Right.
All the time. I'm naked with you. Stop with the armor. And part of this for me is this sense of almost that sense of, if the ship's going down, then you know what? Let's at least create stories of worthiness that will be worthy of generation. Let's have conversations that, let's say today, Justin, this just goes into a pod. Well, you know what? We've actually talked about things of substance. And realize that doesn't mean everyone's going to care, or even many people will care. But it does show that you and I care.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, on a deeper level, that's all that matters. That's focused energy. That's coherent. That's not, in a way you would say, the billions of zeros that come from just being part of identity through friction. It's following this bridge. And that's what I do feel, that this allows us then to commune with qualities of consciousness that are very gracious and say, I don't want to intrude. Because if I did, you wouldn't think it was you. You would think it was us. So what I want to do is to reassure you that now is the time to ask certain questions where you live and love, to protect them as you would as a father, to say this isn't up for debate, this isn't up for critique. And if there is judgment of it, I'm not interested in the least. And this is what I tell my artist friends. Do not ask people what they think about your art. Ask them what your art makes them think. Let's get away from the critique and begin to have a discussion. Otherwise, we really are enslaved to our accountants of imagination that say, well, you're as good as you are making money. Where's your demographics? Yeah. Who's this for then? You know, we have that. That's our, you know, in our inner tormentor. But again, the final exam says, are you still willing to do it? A bit like Job, right? In the Bible. If it seems useless and pointless, seems like all you're doing is struggling and it's futile, are you still willing to love me? Are you still willing to say yes rather than yikes? You know, and it's important because that's where you start to say, yeah. Listen, the heroic Grail Knights didn't come up because somebody told them to, but something in the heart of each said, I will live by what I find honorable, like a samurai. I will be a warrior, not a coward on the service of an authority that makes me less, but an inner authority that makes me fearless of death. You see, and that's why the Grail, why the ideal, why that, and that's what's imbued here. You know, I really feel that I sit sometimes here and I think, you know, if this is it, if that's all there is, this is enough. It's a rare place to get. Because it says, I am part of a magnificent species that never knew, essentially never can know. But in spite of that, like Job, in spite of forever being beaten down, forever crucified, forever tormented, in spite of that, still lives their children, still tries, still struggles, still wants to be the best they can be. And when you look around in a library, you think, wow, look at the beauty in these books. Look at the heroic willingness in these books. And they didn't get out of anything. You have to argue they did all of it in spite of everything like we're doing now. But they chose to. And this is where I feel very strongly. Don't wait for people who aren't going to choose to do so. But if you're going to do so, then do so, at least where you live. And don't worry about convincing the neighbor. They have their things to do. But do think about the people you love. Because if push comes to shove, and I've been here, and it's all about to go away, that's all you think about. You don't think about what you had or what you were or what you think about them. And that's why we don't want to leave. We want to actually honor that preciousness. The idea that I would lose 1 second with my wife or with my children breaks my heart. Do you know, that's the tenderness I think we come to this planet for. You know, my dear old dog, my dear Haiku is on her last legs, literally. And I have an old cat who's so old that Methuselah visits her. But, you know, the relationship with these old friends, you know, just watching and then watching friends die. It sobers you up. It really does. Makes you realize, I asked my mom this when she died. I said, Mom, how long does life seem like it's been? And she had the sweetest look and she said, it seems like it just began. And then she closed her eyes and she was gone. And I've been running next to a freight train ever since then, because she's right. She's right. Blink of an eye, this is over. The book is back on the shelf. And if we understood that, we wouldn't really get into the repetition of the things we don't really want to be. And that's why it's up to us. It's a mental martial art. It is up to us. That's the Aquarian. If you want to talk about what's coming, the blossom, it's self-determination. And to me, these were the seeds that were planted long ago when we talked about the genesis of what we think of as religion. Planting the seeds of this time where there would be no belief in anything. There would be no sense of anything more. There would be desperation. There would be the feeling that the journey was over and that it had come to naught, and there would be despair. Because the truth is that, a bit like the imaginal cells in a butterfly, they begin to imagine the wings, they don't just appear. I believe that these conversations, I believe those of us that listen to these types of podcasts that share this type of belief in life are those imaginal selves. Because we can't expect something that doesn't live with us as us to give us the answers to anything. They can visit, they can confuse us, they can create wonder, but they can't actually journey with us. Only we can build the necessary materials with which to bridge into this larger story. And that's why I do feel that the Hopi talk about a sipaput, a gate between worlds at the end of the world. And to a great degree, one could argue that's what this hieroglyph, the human soul is. It's a sipaput, because it's built with love and creation, with breath. It honors the myth and story of home, of the painted cave. But in its embrace, it holds all the stories, all the books, all the ages. So it's timeless because it holds all time. And it honors the mother because the mother says, I am she who gives birth to all generation. And even Christ, the story of Christ appears here on the floor of the hieroglyph as this great right angle in the human psyche of the knowledge of the Father. Is the knowledge of I love, therefore I am. Which is
Agape. Yeah.
And then the knowledge of the self-reflection, which is I think, therefore I am. And that we've had to balance these qualities of love and thought. And this is where I feel a lot of our work is not about being more or being more grand or figuring it out or going faster. But you'd almost say a family reunion that begins within oneself. You know?
Yeah.
Your ancestors lived. They don't want you to realize, think that you don't have a connection. Only those that want to keep you in a way, which is another part of yourself. It's not them,
Yeah.
Because that's the genius of this place. You're self-enslaving.
Through distraction.
Beliefs are enslaving. That's the one thing I have to say. Did my beliefs enslave me or they free me?
Yeah.
And
I like to talk about the loose apprehension of belief, right? Not the rigidity of belief, but just have it there, flexible, plastic, like you said.
Yeah.
Don't grip it too hard, Just don't grip the
sure.
belief too. Use it as a utility.
Yes, exactly. That's the structure. That's the thing, is if you hold form and energy in a relationship, then they both do. We talked about flow earlier. They begin to hold a type of dynamic synergy. This is my hope about those that find their way like ourselves. I even wrote a piece called Notes on the Emerging Renaissance, which is about 108 different sort of maxims. But it was it began with let the Renaissance begin with me shall be our motto. It's the idea that we have to be the ones that like let's say the great Italian Renaissance, the great spread, the great Renaissance, that really, if you think about it, wasn't a great number of people. It was those that began to share a different worldview that said, you know what, if we nurture each other, if we talk with each other, and we express it through our arts, we will create the conditions for these qualities to become self-evident and therefore much more important. But they didn't go to people that would have been in that world saying, I don't get it. No, I don't want to do it. No, they gathered with themselves. This is why I think this is important for us, that you'd even think that the masculine in us in a psychological sense is the ego that, again, reaches out. The feminine in us, if you think about intimacy, is that which wants to gather back to the heart, meaning stop trying to convince, stop shouting. Shout, don't whisper, because those that are meant to hear will. And if you need to shout, no one will hear. Because now think about a beloved, right? She goes, listen, I want to bring you back here. Because this is between you and me. This isn't between us and them. That's not an interesting romance. It's between you and me. So let's find this universality in our relationship and begin to realize, this is why I think Campbell was so important, and certainly I embody this as well, is why we have to honor the fact that each of us, like you are Adam, I am Adam, and this isn't a religious narrative, meaning the story of man and woman. Each man is man, each woman, meaning imbued with qualities. And we have a lot of, trans this and that's really not what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about primary archetype, which like yin yang is trying to tell us that when you trust this Adam Cadman, this physiology, you'll realize that you have a partner rather than a prisoner, and that you can be helped. And I always use a creative metaphor for, in other words, a dancer learns the dance and then she feels the energy and is moving with the music. It's quite natural at that point, but has done all of the necessary study, all the necessary training, all the necessary stretching to allow that
to get that mode. Yeah.
And that's the right relationship, honoring the hard work of the stretching, what needs to be done, of working, of rehearsing, because that's due diligence. That's the
Discipline.
art. Well, people think they look at a finished painting, and I say, listen, my mentor is not the finished painting as much as the process of arriving at the finished painting is a bit like taking a world tour.
Yeah.
You go to India and you go to Germany, like that's,
Yeah.
this is important because it starts to say that nothing is like energy. It's not really lost. We're just so object driven or so outcome oriented that we want to see that in ourselves rather than realizing, no, wait a minute, what if it's how I pitch my sense of curiosity, like more like a farmer or a gardener, and realize that's why my magus, you can see in the drawing, is a seed, because it's all about seed planting, meaning that, I realized in my work that there's a vastness, there's an incomprehensible ability on an intellectual level to much of what I do, a bit like I'm sure Beethoven, if he could hear the Ninth Symphony. In other words, it would be, oh, I didn't real until it was out, then it's no longer his. It's that great. It is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, but it's no longer Beethoven. And I feel like that's what's happened here, is this is a larger expression than any one day of my life or any one intellectual comprehension of a given part or work I'm working on presently really expresses. It's a larger and larger coherence where one thing is relating to another. So it's very symphonic. And what I find very revelatory and hopeful is that it is suggesting that with a great deal of the friction and wind that is going on, the difficulty is to, again, allow that to be precautious about it, to take, just get out of your car anymore, look around a bit, there's any dangerous fans around, the type of thing. But I kind of feel like we're being asked to up our being present, our sort of precautionary self, but not to let that infect our worldview. You know what I mean? In other words, it's a passing, this too shall pass. It's very important for our time. That it's a season that is trying to germinate a seed. It's trying to get us to trust this story.
Yeah, and in listening to you, I was formulating a thought cloud, and in Revelation/Apocalypse being necessary first, and then the rebirth renaissance that you speak of. I see it, as you just mentioned, as us taking responsibility and discipline as individuals to cultivate whatever that may be, respective to our sensibilities as individuals, but also that we are, and I say this metaphorically, we are stigmergic creatures. We are swarm, and the murmuration or the swarm intelligence to it. I mean, we are tribal. Yeah. One more step, that we are the stigmergic process. And in thinking of stigmergy and the swarm mentality, that if enough little units, cells, whatever we want to use in this metaphor, start lining up a little bit, that there will be salience there and coherence there that is then impression, or yes, I guess it's impressionable to the other subjects. So I was formulating that while you were talking, and I'm thinking, well, because my original question that I would have posed to you is, what does Renaissance look like in a very complex society of just communication and a lot of cultural normatives that are disparate of one another. So that's such a complex thought. But then again, you go down to the individual, and what that personal Renaissance looks like, what your personal apocalypse looks like, and the revelatory insights that come. And I've had that a couple of times in my life that honed me and disciplined me and pointed me in a better direction. So I got that from what you were saying. I don't know if that's something that you would see.
As being... As a matter of fact, yeah, I do. And I think it's very true. And one of the things in the notes on the emerging Renaissance that I wrote about was that in the future that individuals would form nodes, and that the nodes would come together like so many pearls on a necklace. Because what I think this is very important. Like, I realize my work and my questions, like Nassim Haramein was here, the physicist, different people. What I love is their language, their ideas. But I love this cross-pollination where they go, this inspires me. This allows me to see in a different language many of the things that we are dealing with. And that's why a lot of this, and why the Renaissance was so important, was that essentially the truth was that if your ideas are what you say they are, they should be beautiful. And if they are truly beautiful, they should become art, because art is timeless, and that which is truly timeless is a really good idea.
Yeah.
You see, you're tending toward universal principles, toward a set of values inherent in the energy and in the relationship. And that's why I feel that, especially with younger people and how science and Star Trek and all this, there is a type of cross-pollination going on. There's a synesthesia. And I really feel that Renaissance is the awakening. What the indicator here is, sort of the prophetic lens here, is this story that I'm trying to think if I can do this, is this phoenix arise, and all of these blossoms you can see that come from this one painting that is up behind me. That's a 5 foot by 7 foot painting, Phoenix Arise. And all of these wheels are mandalas created by cards from this drawing. And you can see over there the DNA that it creates. Do you see that? You can see the weave on the frame above the Gavin Newt that I drew. Why this is, I believe, quite essential is that it's all about the fact that here we sit in the outcome of ages. And that you would say part of the truth is that we wanted to create fixed platform. Like I was asked, like I had Mayan priests and ayahuasqueros, and they said, do you want to do ayahuasca with us? And I said, well, let me ask, because I was told on my path I wasn't to do hallucinogens. But also I did not need to get out. I didn't need to break. I needed to find an anchor. I needed to find my wife, Carla. I needed to find Earth. And it was very interesting, because the response I got was that in my case, not with everyone, but many people have these inner experiences, and that the medicine opens these inner gates or doorways. But the question is, how do you actually then manifest outwardly environment that allows these ruminations, these insights, these to become fixed? This is why many of, from the painted cave to fixed environments, it was that when you have the experience, how do you impress it? How do you give it a way to get on its feet so you can interact with it? And that's essentially the creative imagination. How do you allow it to exist with you? And a lot of the quality here is this sense of an instrument that created and fixed into a fixed platform, that which now when an individual stands with it, it opens up within them their own relationship to it. There's not a right way to do it or a wrong way to do it, but really like a tuning fork, once struck, it begins to emanate. And that's why context is very important, and why this room is very important, because it starts to say, as strange as this room is in one way, it's also quite an appropriate strangeness, because it's not doing anything for us. You know what I mean? It's not tricking us. It's just the oldest gesture in the world, the human hand, leaving in permanent form through paint a story. To me, that's the message of the ancestor. We've left across the ages a story now that tells you you're the technology, and that if you ask the right questions and begin to ask them within places where you feel safe, and honor them with people that are part of these nodes, that are honoring these things, trust that there will be an unfoldment unlike anything else, because it won't be which node is the true truth. In other words, is it science? Is it religion? It's a library. Stop fighting over the books. The genius of the library is it's all of the books. Our genius as a species is it's all of these things. So that's why I feel like the happy librarian as well, because I know we're getting out of time, but I just feel like the sense of, like, as the happy librarian saying, it's not about what authors we like or don't like. That's personal taste. They're here. But also the authors you don't like and what you find distasteful, because it's part of it. And when we can honor that, then we're not fighting over it. And we're not saying the resolution would be to burn those books, but actually to finally arrange them in a way that I go back to that we can live with, and that begins to honor not the grand abstraction of billions of people, but the intimate life that is ours, and brings us back to the truth that there is nothing more precious to it. So start with that, rather than the disbelief outside the front gate, so to speak.
Oh yeah, because you fall into confirmation bias at that point. And when you put your hand back to the Mother Mary, this beautiful, yes, just like that, the hand transmutes. And so the hand is pointing to something right now, but also the painting of the hand is pointing symbolically to something. So I just had that crazy thought, and I'm like, oh, that's so beautiful, Leigh. You're pointing, and Mother Mary is pointing, and she's pointing to something that's going to be pointing. It's almost, it's not infinite, but it's beautiful how the hand
really,
wrought that which points, much like the hand. So
and everything does. It brings us back into the picture that it's always been the human hand. It's been touch that puts us in touch, literally. And what I love is that we can live. I tell people to touch the art. I know they're used to museums. Don't touch that. Here it's inescapable. It's on the floor. You are surrounded, you're immersed in it. And I really feel like that's her love, why she's naked. She says, listen, honey, you're home. Quit thinking you can convince me with the diatribes you convince the people you have beers with. In other words, I know you.
Yeah,
exactly. That to me is why the feminists feared. It's like, what the BS. Take out the trash. Well, that's why this is my home. It's like, no matter how grand my cosmology, my wife will look at me and go, take out the garbage. So
you're still human. You're still.
I kind of feel
that's
what the archetypes are saying. Like, get over yourself. Take out the garbage. Life has a whole lot of responsibilities, so it's not getting out of any of it.
No.
Beginning to realize, in domestic space, there's one question. In the space of the world and structure, there's another. In the space of the imagination, there's another. In the garden, and when we notice that, you see the spokes of the wheel.
And now, that's the authenticity of the Renaissance, right? It's the being genuine and no pretense, and in the truth of experience and the knowledge that the spokes provide, or the utility, the modal utility that you find in those spokes drives that Renaissance, so that to the best of your degree that you can, that this Renaissance is authentic and it is moving you in a forward direction, and you're not bullshitting yourself. You're literally in touch with what your flow should be, is what I'm getting out of that.
Yeah, and if you think of the wheel, the tarot, on the floor beneath your feet, actually, I'll show you this picture. You begin to see. Now, think of the puma there. If you started to spin that wheel, it would become like a gyroscope. But you'd have the puma, the center, still there, and the gyroscope would be able to balance and move. And that's what this is trying to say, is once we see the wheel rather than the line, once we trust our inner animal, which is in a way our connection to our primordial selves, we trust our energies, then these archetypal structures, these spokes, like the library, can support us in a way that again, think of a gyroscope that would let you, no matter what the stormy weather, the wave comes up, but you move away, and wave comes up, you move away.
Resilience,
different center. And I feel a lot of that. That's why even my Fool archetype, when you look at it, has around its center, it has the wheel, because it's actually this idea that we find in our gut, in a way, in our third brain, we find this sense of balance. This goes back to the martial art thing, the sense of where the paw, where the chi,
situational awareness.
So,
you have been a brilliant guest and a brilliant companion in this ride that we've taken together, Leigh. I am really sincerely grateful that we had this time together. Persons watching this video, those who are with us, you guys you guys had a beautiful experience too, because you're still here, and so I appreciate that. So YouTube viewers, I appreciate that. Leigh, any finishing thoughts before we part ways? I will say before that that I will have lots of contact information for your website, your YouTube channel, anything else I'll say goodbye to you off after we're done recording, and any relevance that you want in that description field of this video, I'll make sure it's there so people can access you.
Yeah, no, there was actually just something published in Cosmos Journal. I'll send you the link for that. She did a
Okay.
nice job of laying that out, and Sanctuary Magazine. So
Yeah.
yeah, if you've got those links, I would just say to people, if you're still here, yeah,
You're my
you
peeps.
probably would go and check out those links. So I would. I post on YouTube a lot of short, but to talk about everything from tarot to the art to
Yeah.
ideas, philosophy, because I really feel a very strong sense, and this is what I really want to honor in you, Justin, and what I've always honored in this home is this desire to bring forth that, whether it's books or texts or ideas that get us to gather around it and not really make it a salon of my personal ideas, but what is it that pulls out a greater understanding, how we can transcend our own bias and again, break free of the isolated self, almost like with the tarot, I had this image that the archetypes had their backs to themselves and now to each other, and now we're turning to see each other, but like jazz music. You know, if you carry this conversation, trust it. It's like the excellence in jazz. Trust your instrument, your phrase, trust it. It's not about being different. It's about saying, how can I show up? Because the garden is not grown like this. It is cultivated. And that's why we are in this cultivation, and we will become the garden we are cultivating. And what I love to share here is I'm not speaking abstractly now. I'm speaking in the heart of manifestation of a greater love that says we are worthy. We had to find our way home. And now it will be our stories that give us a sense of feeling alive again, feeling that we are the creators of meaning, that it won't be given. We will help cultivate it. And so that's why I'm optimistic and why I believe that in these difficult and troubled times, the questions we ask and where we pay attention are so important. So please check out my book on the tarot. I have a sample a chapter on justice on my website,
Okay.
and see if it tastes right. Because if it does, it will take you. It will open. It answered questions that I had pondered all of my life, and it came not because I figured it out intellectually, but I'd actually done the hard work of going there. So
Okay.
See what you think. And anyway, Justin, I just wanted to say thank you, and may you continue to have substantive conversations and bring them, you know, as I say, even if it's to a handful of people, let's keep doing this.
Yeah.
Because the greater neurology goes, how do you think a brain damage brain heals? It doesn't look that. It starts to grow healthy cells.
Yeah.
I really feel we're an autoimmune reaction. And so we can trust that we are meant to find our way.
Yeah.
And that, you know, and that will be, we will be the transformation because we will have earned it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Otherwise we would just implement. So,
yes.
Yes.
Good. Absolutely. I will say goodbye to you after we stop record, but I will say goodbye to you now as well for YouTube. And again, much thanks for this beautiful conversation. So, all right.